What happens when silence turns into a storm? Amara Daniels, a quiet 15-year-old, had always been the type to keep her head low and avoid unnecessary attention. But one fateful day in Greenville High School, Mr. Blake, a teacher infamous for his biting sarcasm, pushed her too far. In front of the entire class, he made a mocking comment about her, targeting not just her but her identity. What no one expected was Amara's response, a bold revelation that exposed the deep-seated prejudice lurking beneath the surface and left the room frozen in shock. Greenville High School was like any other high school in small-town America, hallways buzzing with chatter, classrooms filled with cliques, and the occasional teacher who everyone whispered about. For Amara Daniels, a 15-year-old who preferred the comfort of her books over the chaos of teenage life, the school was both a sanctuary and a challenge. She was quiet but far from timid, her resilience forged by experiences few could imagine. In room 302, the air was tense that day. Mr. Blake, known for his sharp tongue and unfiltered humor, was standing at the front of the class. His reputation preceded him, students admired his intellect but dreaded his sarcasm, which often crossed the line. Amara usually stayed under his radar, but today was different. As she walked into the room, she could feel the eyes of her peers on her. Mr. Blake, sensing an opportunity, made a remark that cut deeper than she let on. The classroom erupted in awkward laughter, but Amara didn't join in. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath as she stood there, her face unreadable. No one could have predicted what she was about to do, or the impact it would have. The classroom was unusually quiet as Mr. Blake stood at the front, pacing back and forth during the history lesson. His voice echoed through the room, confident and sharp. He thrived on catching students off guard, and today, his focus fell on Amara Daniels. "Amara," he called, his tone dripping with challenge. She looked up hesitantly, her pen frozen mid-note. "Let's hear your thoughts on the economic benefits of slavery. Or is this subject a little too personal for you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. A wave of unease rippled through the class as a few students exchanged nervous glances. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others stared down at their desks, avoiding the tension altogether. Mr. Blake smirked, clearly relishing the discomfort. Amara felt the heat rising in her cheeks. The humiliation was sharp, but deeper than that was the sting of his words, a deliberate jab at her race. She clenched her fists under the desk, steadying herself against the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Her voice wavered as she stood, but it carried a determination that silenced the murmurs. "Slavery," she began, locking eyes with Mr. Blake, wasn't just an economic system. It was a crime, one that destroyed millions of lives, families, and futures. And while you might think mocking it makes for a good joke, it only shows your ignorance. The class froze, stunned by her courage. Amara took a deep breath and continued, her voice growing steadier. "But since you're asking about economic benefits, let's be clear. This country's wealth was built on the backs of enslaved people who never saw a fraction of what they earned for others. The real question isn't what slavery benefited, Mr. Blake. It's why people like you think it's okay to treat it like a punchline." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. Mr. Blake's smug expression faltered as he tried to find a retort, but nothing came. The room remained still, every student too stunned to speak. For the first time, Mr. Blake appeared at a loss for words. He stood motionless, his authority stripped away as the weight of Amara's words settled over the room. His usual sharp demeanor now seemed hollow, his gaze darting across the classroom as if searching for a lifeline. But none came. The students, still processing what had just unfolded, were a mix of emotions. Some looked at Amara with awe, impressed by her courage to stand up to the teacher everyone feared. Others avoided eye contact entirely, clearly uncomfortable with the tension and the truth she had voiced. A few, however, wore faint smiles of approval, silently applauding her boldness. Amara sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. Her heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline still surging through her veins. She wasn't sure whether to feel triumphant or terrified. Fear gnawed at her, fear of retaliation, fear of what would come next. But alongside that fear was an undeniable sense of pride. She had spoken her truth, something she never thought she'd have the courage to do in such a public setting. The bell rang, snapping everyone out of their daze. Students began gathering their belongings, casting glances at both Mr. Blake and Amara as they filed out of the room. Mr. Blake remained at his desk, still silent, his composure visibly shaken. As Amara walked out, a classmate leaned over and whispered, "That was incredible." Another gave her a small nod of respect. She met their eyes briefly, a flicker of relief crossing her face. But as she stepped into the hallway, a weight settled back on her shoulders. The confrontation was over, but she knew the aftermath was just beginning. By lunchtime, the incident had spread like wildfire across Greenville High. The cafeteria buzzed with whispers and murmurs, students huddled together in tight groups, eagerly recounting the confrontation in the history class. "Did you hear what Amara said to Mr. Blake?" "She completely shut him down," one student exclaimed, their voice tinged with admiration. "She had guts, I'll give her that," said another. "But, I don't know, isn't she overreacting?" At a table near the back, Amara sat with her two closest friends, Leah and Jada. They were her anchors in the storm that was brewing around her. Leah, always the optimist, was practically glowing with pride. "Girl, you were amazing. I wish I had recorded it." "You said exactly what needed to be said," Leah said, her eyes sparkling. Jada nodded in agreement, her voice more subdued but equally supportive. "You stood up for yourself. That takes real courage. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Amara managed a small smile, but the weight of the day hung heavy on her shoulders. As much as she appreciated her friend's encouragement, she couldn't shake the unease creeping up inside her. Across the room, Jake, one of the school's most popular students, walked over to their table. Heads turned as he approached. Jake had a reputation for being a leader, someone whose opinions carried weight among the student body. "Amara," he said, his tone serious but kind. "What you did today? That was powerful. Not a lot of people would have the guts to do what you did. Respect." Amara blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected support. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the cafeteria. But not everyone shared Jake's sentiment. As he walked away, a group of students at a nearby table snickered loudly. "She just wanted attention," one of them said, loud enough for Amara to hear. "Mr. Blake wasn't even being racist. She's just making it a big deal for no reason." Amara's stomach churned. The mixed reactions were more than she had anticipated. Some students approached her to commend her bravery, while others shot her skeptical glances, their whispers dripping with judgment. By the end of lunch, Amara felt drained. She had stood up for herself, but the reality of being the center of attention, both positive and negative, was overwhelming. Later that evening, Amara sat in her room, the glow of her desk lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. She stared blankly at her history textbook, her mind replaying the events of the day on an endless loop. "Was I wrong to speak up?" she whispered to herself. The memory of Mr. Blake's face, the students' reactions, and the biting comments in the cafeteria all collided in her thoughts. Scrolling through her phone didn't help. A few supportive messages from classmates made her smile, but they were overshadowed by the harsher ones. "She's always playing the race card. Typical. Just trying to make herself look like a victim. She made it awkward for everyone. Not cool." Amara's chest tightened. Doubts flooded her mind. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe she should have just let it slide like so many times before. A soft knock on her door broke her train of thought. "Come in," she said quietly. Her mother, Mrs. Daniels, stepped inside, her expression warm and reassuring. "Hey, baby. You've been quiet since you got home. Everything okay?" Amara hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really. I don't know if I did the right thing, Mom. People are saying I overreacted. Maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut." Mrs. Daniels sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Amara, listen to me. You did what many people wouldn't have the courage to do. You spoke your truth. And sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, not everyone is going to agree with you. That doesn't make it wrong. But what if they're right? What if I just made everything worse? Amara's voice wavered. Mrs. Daniels shook her head firmly. You didn't make things worse. You made people think. And sometimes, that's uncomfortable for them. But you can't let fear of their opinion silence you. You have a voice, Amara. Use it. Her mother's words brought a flicker of relief. Amara leaned into her embrace, letting the tears she had been holding back finally fall. You're not alone in this, Mrs. Daniels continued. Your family is here for you. And the people who matter will see the strength in what you did today. As her mother left the room, Amara felt a renewed sense of determination. The fear and doubt hadn't disappeared, but they were now accompanied by a quiet resolve. She had spoken up, and no matter what came next, she wasn't going to let regret take that away from her. By the next week, the impact of Amara's actions had grown far beyond the four walls of the history classroom. Her courage had sparked something in her peers, something they had all felt but never dared to voice aloud. It started with small whispers. Students who had been targets of Mr. Blake's sarcastic and cutting remarks began to open up. During lunch, a junior named Marcus shared his story with a group of friends. He made fun of my accent last year, Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration. Said I sounded like I just got off the boat. I wanted to say something, but I froze. Seeing Amara stand up to him, it gave me hope. One by one, more stories surfaced. Mr. Blake's pattern of behavior, once brushed aside as tough love or just his personality, was now under scrutiny. A senior, Sophia, revealed how he had made a demeaning comment about her family's immigrant background. Another student admitted he had been too afraid to challenge Mr. Blake when the teacher belittled his dyslexia in front of the class. Amara's courage had unlocked a floodgate. Students began organizing, sharing their stories in group chats and on social media. A hashtag #StandWithAmara, started to trend among Greenville High students, symbolizing their solidarity and demand for change. But the real turning point came when Amara's parents, Mrs. Daniels and her father, Mr. Daniels, scheduled a meeting with the school principal, Mr. Carter. They weren't just advocating for their daughter, they were pushing for accountability. In the meeting room, Amara sat between her parents, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had never been in the principal's office for anything like this before. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Daniels began, her tone firm but composed. This isn't just about what happened to Amara. It's about a culture that allows a teacher to demean students without consequence. We're here to demand change. Principal Carter looked uncomfortable, his fingers nervously tapping a pen against the table. I understand your concerns, and I assure you, the school takes these matters seriously. We will be conducting a thorough investigation into Mr. Blake's conduct. An investigation is a start, Mr. Daniels added, his voice steady. But we need transparency. We need action. Our children deserve a safe and respectful learning environment. Amara, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. It's not just me, Mr. Carter. Other students have stories too. I've heard them. This isn't an isolated incident. Her voice, though soft, carried a conviction that couldn't be ignored. Principal Carter nodded, visibly moved. Within days, the school sent out an official statement acknowledging the incident and announcing an investigation into Mr. Blake's behavior. It was a small victory, but it was also a beginning. Meanwhile, Amara's story continued to inspire. Teachers at Greenville High began discussing ways to create a more inclusive and respectful environment. Students started workshops and discussion groups to address issues like racism and discrimination, determined to make their school a better place for everyone. Weeks after the incident, Amara found herself walking through the school hallways with a new sense of purpose. The weight she had carried for so long, the fear of speaking out, the fear of standing alone, felt lighter now. The investigation into Mr. Blake's conduct revealed years of inappropriate comments and behavior. By the end of the semester, he was removed from his teaching position. The school administration promised to implement new training programs for teachers and staff to address issues of bias and cultural sensitivity. Amara's peers treated her differently now. She wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of the class anymore. She had become a symbol of strength and resilience. Students she barely knew would stop her in the hallway to thank her. "You made a difference, Amara," Jake told her one day after class. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." But while the external changes were rewarding, it was the internal growth that mattered most to Amara. One evening, as she sat in her room journaling, she reflected on everything that had happened. At first, she had doubted herself, wondering if speaking out had been worth the backlash. But now, she understood something deeper: silence enables prejudice to thrive. By using her voice, she had disrupted that cycle. Her mother's words echoed in her mind: "Your voice matters, Amara. Don't let anyone take that away from you." As she closed her journal, she smiled. The experience had taught her that change doesn't come easily, but it starts with courage. It starts with one voice willing to speak up, even when it shakes. Amara knew her journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, and the fight for equality was far from complete. But she was ready to face whatever came next. Racism thrives in silence. But one voice, no matter how small, can inspire change. What would you have done in Amara's place? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can confront prejudice and create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.